This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture. And welcome to the City of God podcast, where we are weekly talking about today's biggest cultural issues, all through the lens of God's infallible word. I'm Pastor Rob Pacienza, and I am joined today by a very special guest, my good friend, Ryan Helfenbein. He is the Vice President of Communications and Public Engagement at Liberty University. And at Liberty, he also serves as the Executive Director for the Standing for Freedom Center. Ryan, so good to see you today.
Pastor Rob, it's great to be with you. By the way, if you're having big conversations, you don't want to be having it with this guy, but I thank you for having me on.
I appreciate it. Ryan, let's dive right into what you do at Liberty. Wear many hats.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the Standing for Freedom Center. Why does it exist? What's its purpose?
You know, the Standing for Freedom Center goes back to square one. It goes back to the heart of our founder, Dr. Falwell. When he founded our institution in 1971, he wanted a world-class academic, program, institution for evangelicals. He wanted top-level athletics. He often compared it to Notre Dame and Brigham Young. He had that in mind. But he also had in mind, this is one of the 10 distinctives. If you go to his biography, he had 10 distinctives about Liberty University. And number 4, critical among them, number 4, was a conservative institution, not only biblically, but politically conservative. Really training up that next generation to understand the principles of freedom, pro-free market. He was very much against political correctness. He wanted people to speak boldly on matters of truth, defending life, defending marriage, defending those key critical cultural issues in the public arena. And he wanted them to be armed and equipped with a working apologetic to do that.
That's amazing. If people want to find out more about the Standing for Freedom Center website.
Yeah, standingforfreedom.com.
Okay.
And I'll tell you this, on our social channels, it's Freedom Center LU. If you go to, Instagram, if you go to Twitter, if you go to Facebook, that's where we are. That's where a lot of our content is.
It's awesome. Love the name, love the target, love the mission. Ryan, you're with college students all the time.
Yeah.
We see the numbers from Barna. We see the statistics, and even Barna admits, George Barna admits that, these are conservative statistics, but maybe the numbers are even worse when it comes to the next generation, the spiritual state of the next generation, the amount of youth, even that are growing up in the church, that are walking away from the faith. What are some of the biggest issues you see right now concerning the next generation in North America?
I want to say what I see in the church and then what I see outside. What I see in the church is I'm seeing incoming students who grew up in the church, who were not fully oriented, catechized, whatever you want to say, discipled in the faith, right? They don't have a historic understanding. They don't have a full kind of articulate orthodoxy that they could really defend biblical truth. So there's problems there. Whether it be that they were evangelized at an early age, but they didn't go to Christian school, they went to public school. There are gaps. There are some significant knowledge gaps when it comes to biblical literacy among Christian students coming in. Secondly, secularization, we can't ignore it. It's a challenge. It's everywhere. Gen Z is by far the most unaffiliated, maybe not atheistic in the truest sense, but certainly agnostic, religiously unidentified group. That is a big demographic challenge. But let me just say this, Pastor, I am very encouraged too to see that there are some new converts, those who did not grow up in the faith. I just had a wonderful conversation with a young student who had only been a Christian for 2 years, is already reading, already engaging with some incredible work. Chesterton, Schaeffer, right? Lewis, and is really, reading, the student in particular, reading her Bible, but did not grow up in the church. And so that can be changed in an instant, right? I mean, what Paul said, in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, when he said, such were some of you. It's so important to recognize that the moment that we come to faith in Christ, we begin a whole new journey of discipleship, and we can get oriented to the faith very quickly.
One of the things that people always hold against conservative Christians, evangelicals, is that you're too far engaged in politics. And the next generation is super skeptical anytime we talk about faith and politics. So how do you talk to a young person, not only about cultural engagement in a broad sense, but how faith also includes being engaged in politics and the conversations concerning the public square?
Yeah, I think, okay, so there's this kind of cynicism, this kind of pessimism that what are you really aiming at? And if a church is very narrow and very shallow in its orthodoxy, it doesn't have a robust biblical theology, but it seems that its ultimate scheme is that it's always doing politics. It's always doing voter drives. It's always doing ballot initiatives, or it's always sort of convening local officials. And then you say, well, what are you doing in the area of discipleship? Are you holding programs? Are you doing things like Evangelism Explosion? Are you really evangelizing your local community? If they're shallow in those areas, look, we have reasons to be skeptical that church is actually serious about Christian discipleship, really serious about evangelism. But assuming we're doing all of those things and we're doing them well and we are obedient, right, to preach the whole counsel of God, and then also we're no holds barred, right? We're engaging in every critical frontline cultural issue, including politics, and we're doing so faithfully and consistently. Those types of cynical rebuttals don't really have a leg to stand on because you're living your faith consistently. So when they see the fact that that you care about the families in your community, if they see that not only are you saying, hey, we need to vote on the life issue, but you really are caring for the single moms who are in crisis pregnancy. If they're seeing that you have a true ministry, maybe to the homeless and to those in the area. But your evangelization is not just focused in one area, but it's for all of those other areas and all of those concentrations. They see that consistency. I think that they're going to see the faithfulness of that call, right? To understand that the Bible and the obedience to the Christian Scripture has no end. We have to engage because Christ commands it.
Ryan, you've gone to seminary. You've gone through theological training. You believe in some of the great doctrines of the faith, like the sovereignty of God and the lordship of Jesus Christ. How do those two doctrines, just in particular, the sovereignty of God and the lordship of Christ, inform your understanding of how the church should engage culture?
Yeah. So the great thing is that because God is sovereign and because He is Lord, our failure or our success, it doesn't make it cease to be true, or doesn't make it untrue. If I fail to live up to my Christian responsibility, He is no less Lord. Okay, so I can rest in the sovereignty of God. I can know that every day that when I rise up in the morning and I'm trying to evangelize a lost, or let's say that I'm trying to push on some sort of cultural issue. We have to recognize what Jesus said. He has already overcome the world. Christ is already Lord. He is already victorious over the grave. He's already seated at the right hand of God the Father. So, we need to kick to the curb pessimism. Yeah. I think that a Christian should be a happy warrior.
Yeah.
I think, founder of...
so it gives you hope.
Yes.
Regardless of how dark this cultural moment is.
That's exactly right. And I think it also gives you courage, too, because you say, hey, look, just like Polycarp in the arena, renounce your atheism, Polycarp. He says, I renounce all you atheists. In a way, there's a little humor in that. But the only reason he has the courage to do it is because he knows Jesus Christ is Lord already.
Yeah. So how about the practical application of the lordship of Christ? If I was to say to you, if Jesus is Lord, He's Lord over every earthly power. He's Lord over the economies of this world. He's the Lord over every president, king, and prime minister. Give me your reaction to that.
Well, I think one of the things, He's Lord over all those things. Then all of those areas must come under the lordship of Christ and must be discipled. Go make disciples of all nations. It's really interesting. Luke has two writings that we read in the New Testament, his gospel and then the Acts of the Apostles, both written to the most excellent Theophilus. We don't know who Theophilus was. He does have a Roman title.
Yeah.
And so I do think that when you name all of those things, areas of government, the most prominent places of society, the power seats of culture, all of them must be brought under the lordship of Christ. Now today there is a lot of fear mongering. The words Christian nationalism are pretty rampant. I think it's just a secularist sort of trap, if you will,
Absolutely. To silence the church.
To absolutely scare the church into silence and capitulation to wokeism and indoctrination and anything else. You have to check your worldview at the door. But you realize they want to claim total hegemony. Secularism, humanism, wokeism, Marxism. They want to claim total cultural hegemony. They have their own sort of caliphate, if you will, and their own terminus. They want to dominate all of society. So lordship, sovereignty, I think it gives us courage. Hey, you can't mess this up. Okay. At the end of the day, you just need to be faithful, but it doesn't all rise and fall based on me. It's going to take the whole body of Christ, aimed in one direction and rowing in the same direction. And I think that there can be an optimism for what the future holds also.
That's a good word. Let's switch gears and talk about education. This is something you've committed your career to and your ministry. Thanks be to God that we're not seeing the indoctrination of wokeism and progressivism at Liberty University. Thank God for you and for the great legacy at Liberty University. But you've got your pulse on higher education, I'm sure, across this nation. Talk to our audience a little bit about what you are witnessing, whether it be in higher education or in the public education system in North America, concerning the indoctrination of the next generation in things like wokeism and leftist progressive ideology.
I think, okay, I'm going to break this down into two things. So I think very practically, what you're seeing in education, you have to recognize that education is regulated, right? It's like any sector of the economy, like energy, like healthcare, right? Like the telecommunications, it's regulated. And so today you have the Department of Education, for example, that has a lot of influence on K through 12 education, has a lot of influence on higher ed. And so they are reducing the amount of real viable alternatives that you have. They're going to make it as difficult as they can for homeschooling. They're going to make it as difficult as possible for private Christian schools. They're going to make it as difficult as possible to have at the collegiate and university level to have real viable alternatives that are accredited, that pass, sort of the accreditation standard test, right? If they do not capitulate to the cultural revolutionaries. So if these institutions are not willing to sort of, go the way of the ghost or to somehow strike some kind of compromise, they're going to go out of business. That is what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Thanks be to God for faithful people who do trust in the lordship of Christ, what we talked about before, who have not bent the knee to Beelzebub, and ultimately are willing to stand and hold their ground. But that test of faithfulness is every single day and every single generation. Choose this day whom you shall serve. The words of Joshua, or the words of Moses. I have set before you life and death. His farewell address. So choose life that you may live. We're going to have to stand our ground. The real challenge in education and higher ed today is both from a regulatory perspective and then the practical perspective of worldview, and continuing to be faithful to your confessional standards. So a lot of people, they sign that that confession of faith, or some kind of orthodox standard. And they say, these are the doctrines that we hold to, at least on paper. But then going into the classroom, are they still kind of in a way trying to bend or even break those rules? And that's something where it takes eternal vigilance to continue to guard.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so helpful for our audience, whether they're parents, grandparents, or even a future college student, just to really think through. And so keeping that audience in mind, what are the specifics? So we just talked about in a broad sense what's happening in higher ed and public schools. Like, what either a parent thinking about sending their child off to Ivy League,
Right.
University, or a secular college campus, what are some of the things specifically you're hearing, seeing? What are they going to be faced with if they truly make that decision to send their child in that direction?
There are all kinds of considerations for why, why you pick a particular school. Go in there fully informed of what you're doing. So, there are those who are only kidding themselves. I'm going to go to this particular school because I want to study this, I want to take this degree path or whatever. And at the end of the day, I'm trusting in this institution, to give me a solid education, right? And they might be kidding themselves because what are the worldview commitments of that institution? Have they stayed faithful? Are they even being held by their own standards, right? Harvard University today is not being held by their own standards. I mean, most students would be expelled for plagiarism. You saw how difficult it was to fire their president under the same standards that they would hold their students. And so there is no real accountability. In many ways, it's like Home Alone. There are no parents in charge in these institutions. So you have to be honest with yourself, like why you're going. Some people are looking for, a particular pedigree or a stamp to say, well, no, I didn't go to a Christian school. I went to the University of Iowa or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but this institution might actually break your kids. This institution might actually succeed in deconstructing your kids. Are they really well-rooted and well-grounded in their faith? They can actually withstand those pressures. I call it, Pastor, catch and release. Like in many ways in the evangelical world, we catch our children young, and we want we evangelize them. We're excited. We're ecstatic when they make a profession of faith in Jesus Christ. But then what we do after that is despicable in many ways, because we throw them back to what? To the wolves. And so then we say, hey, do your best, swim in those waters and do your best. And you think, well, no, they're not going to withstand that kind of social pressure. They're not going to withstand, professors who say, hey, if you don't say these things, repeat these things, write these things, I'm going to fail you. You're not going to pass. You're not going to graduate. You're not going to make the grade. So we have to be realistic about what's taking place in the American universities. I will say that if you're looking at nightly news, if you're looking at social media, some things can be exaggerated, but not by much. It is really happening across most universities and most public schools.
That's super helpful. So Ryan, we're filming this podcast in the year 2024, election season. We hear all the time, I'm sure you get it as well, the next generation, these are Christians, children that grow up in the church. When they talk about certain political issues, it's amazing how uninformed they are, or at the very least not using the Bible to inform their decisions and convictions concerning elections and candidates that they're going to vote for. Yet we hear things like, it's actually more merciful to have open borders. America is a racist nation. Therefore, we have to erase history. No, the most loving thing that we can do for women is support their right to choose.
Yeah.
So how do you talk to the next generation? We have parents, grandparents listening and watching this podcast. How do you talk to the next generation, as we said before, that's already skeptical about politics and faith, about what's at stake in this next election, and how actually a biblically informed view of the world is actually much different than what a lot of their younger counterparts are kind of buying into right now?
That is a perfect question. I want to start with the thing we often hear. 2024 is going to be the most critical election of our lifetime. And guess what? If we live to 2026 and 2028, which I believe we will, it will also become the most critical election of our lifetime. That is actually true. I do believe that the stakes are never higher than right now in terms of the direction that we're going. Many people say we're at the point of no return already. They are critical because of the policies that are at stake, right? Ideas have consequences. Bad ideas have victims. We have to recognize that we create victims through bad political policy. Now, with regard to the youngest generation, there are the problems, there are the solutions, there are the principles. I actually believe that part of it is when we address the problem first without starting with the principles, we don't have a blueprint or a roadmap. We don't have anything to refer to. When dealing with, for example, when dealing with counterfeit currency, do you start with the counterfeit and explain why it's wrong? Or do you go ahead and show them, here is what a real dollar bill looks like. Here is the real dollar bill. Notice all of its characteristics. This is what makes it true. This is what makes it authentic. This is what makes it real. Now contrast and compare that with every other counterfeit that you're seeing. This is all the flaws in these designs. This is why this is not real. So we have to start with principles first. This goes back to what I was talking about in the beginning about biblical illiteracy, about this younger generation of Christians. We love them. We're for them. We want them to succeed. But this is the most ill-equipped, the most biblically illiterate, the most undiscipled group of Christians that are coming forward to date. That's our fault. That's my fault. That's a collective responsibility that we have as the church. The classic Hillary Clinton, it takes a village to raise a child, No, we repudiate that entirely, right? That's a bunch of Marxist nonsense. But we do have a responsibility as the church to train up the next generation. That is true. That is true. That is our responsibility before God. But we have to start with principles. Now, something that R. Albert Mohler said years ago in his inaugural address at Southern Seminary. It was entitled "Don't just do something. Stand there." And what he meant is we have to stand on biblical, exactly, Amen. Take a stand for biblical fidelity and biblical truth. So we have to start with the principles. The problem today, and it's the entire justice movement, it is weaponized compassion. So we have taught a generation what love is in worldly terms, right? It is doing the things that seem the most empathetic and sympathetic and compassionate based on what standard, right? It is not on truth and righteousness, but it's based on, what we believe to be the best outcomes for whatever identity groups might be implicated, whatever victim groups we've identified. We oftentimes want to reach for the most compassionate ways to address those issues. The problem is, though, that it's divorced from truth. It's divorced from biblical standards of morality and righteousness. And in many ways, it's also divorced from reality, like the reality itself, right? And so whether it be immigration, whether it be the life issue, whether it be how do we treat our homosexual neighbors? Do we attend their weddings or do we not, right? We have to start with biblical truth and fidelity first, then work our way back to the problem. And I think we would see better outcomes, not popular, but principled.
That's so good. Hey, Ryan, I appreciate your voice and your leadership, and most importantly, your friendship. Great to know that.
Likewise.
Have a partner in crime as we are engaging the next generation for the sake of the kingdom. And we hope you enjoyed this episode with Ryan today. If you were inspired, encouraged by today's episode of the City of God podcast, we pray that you would consider passing it along to a family member, a friend, or someone who is interested in engaging today's biggest cultural issues all through the lens of God's infallible word. Thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the City of God. The City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. Visit us at cityofgodpodcast.com to access all of our previous episodes. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or anywhere you get podcasts. A full video version of this podcast is available on YouTube. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.